There is a strange misunderstanding many people have about God's path. They think it feels peaceful, easy, comfortable. But what if the opposite is true? What if the very evidence that you are walking with God is that your life feels like it is falling apart? Because in hidden biblical psychology, transformation does not feel like elevation at first. It feels like loss, confusion, isolation, and sometimes pain you cannot explain. And this is where most people make a deadly mistake. They assume discomfort means disconnection from God. But what if discomfort is actually confirmation? What if the breaking you are experiencing is proof that you are not lost, but being led? Before we go deep into this, understand this. Not everyone who is struggling is off the path. Some are struggling because they are finally on it. And in the next few minutes, you will discover 8 painful signs that reveal something most people never understand. You may not be broken, you may be aligned. But alignment with God often feels like war against your old life. Before we go further, ask yourself this honestly. Why does doing the right thing sometimes hurt the most? Keep that question in your mind, because the answer begins now. Sign 1. You lose what you once depended on. One of the first painful signs you are walking God's path is sudden loss, not always physical loss. Sometimes it is people, sometimes it is opportunities, sometimes it is identity. Things that once felt stable begin to collapse without warning, and you start asking, why would God allow this? But hidden biblical psychology reveals something deeper. God does not only guide you forward, He also removes what can't go with you, and this removal feels like punishment, but it is actually protection. Because if you keep holding what God is removing, you will never step into what He is building. There is a strange pattern in spiritual growth. Before elevation, there is evacuation. Before expansion, there is emptying. And the pain you feel, it is not rejection, it is a redirection. But here is where it gets more intense. Because the next sign is even harder to accept. Sign 2. You become misunderstood by people closest to you. One of the most emotionally painful signs is misunderstanding. People who used to understand you suddenly don't. Your decisions confuse them. Your silence disturbs them. Your growth irritates them. And slowly, you begin to feel alone, even in a crowd. But this is not random. When God begins to shift your direction, He also shifts your circle, because not everyone is assigned to your next season. And here is the hidden truth. Misunderstanding is often the sound of transition. Even Jesus experienced this. Even His closest companions misunderstood His path. So why do you expect yours to be different? When your direction changes, your language changes. And when your language changes, not everyone can translate you anymore. But isolation is only the beginning, because the next sign affects your mind deeply. Sign 3. Your mind becomes heavier than before. Strangely, as you grow spiritually, your thoughts become louder, not quieter. You begin to overthink more, question more, reflect more, sometimes even spiral mentally. And you wonder, shouldn't peace come with God's path? But here is the hidden truth. Awareness increases weight. When your spiritual perception expands, your mind begins to notice more layers of reality, more risks, more meaning, more depth. And that depth can feel like pressure, because ignorance is light, but truth is heavy. And this is why many spiritually growing people feel mentally overloaded. Not because they are losing stability, but because they are gaining vision. But mental pressure is not the worst part. The next sign hits your identity. Sign 4. You outgrow your old self, but don't know who you are yet. There comes a moment in God's path where you no longer fit your old identity, but you haven't fully received your new one. This creates a painful in-between state. You are not who you were, but you are not yet who you will become. And this creates confusion. You feel lost, disconnected, undefined. But spiritually, this is called transition identity collapse. God removes identity before revealing assignment. Because if you still cling to who you were, you will resist who you are becoming. And that resistance feels like confusion, but it is actually transformation. And just when you think it cannot get deeper, the next sign changes everything. Sign 5. Doors start closing. Without explanation, opportunities that once opened easily begin to shut. Plans fail unexpectedly. People stop responding. Paths become blocked, and it feels like rejection. But spiritually, closed doors are not always denial. Sometimes they are divine protection, because not every open door leads to life. Some lead to delay, some lead to destruction. And God, in His wisdom, closes what your emotions would have entered. Even if it hurts, especially if it hurts, because pain is often the evidence that something mattered, but was not meant. But what happens when even prayer feels different? That's the next sign. Sign 6. Your prayers feel silent. There are seasons where prayer feels like silence, not absence, but distance. You speak, and it feels like nothing is happening. You ask, and no immediate answer comes. And this silence can feel spiritual abandonment, but hidden biblical psychology teaches this. Silence is not absence of God. It is formation time. In silence, roots grow deeper than branches, and what feels like delay is actually depth being formed in you. Because God is not always building outcomes. Sometimes He is building endurance, but the transformation is not over yet, because the next sign affects your relationships again. Sign 7. You begin to feel out of place. Everywhere you can be surrounded by people and still feel like you don't belong, not because something is wrong with you, but because something has changed within you. You no longer resonate with old conversations. Old environments feel heavy. Old energy feels unfamiliar. And this creates emotional displacement. But spiritually, this is alignment separation. God is slowly detaching you from environments that cannot carry your next version, and it feels like loneliness, but it is actually relocation. And finally, the most misunderstood sign of all. Sign 8. Everything hurts, but you are still moving forward. This is the most painful confirmation. Not because life is easy, but because it is not. Yet somehow, you are still moving, still enduring, still becoming. And this makes no logical sense, because pain usually stops people. But on God's path, pain refines instead of stopping. It shapes instead of destroying. And even when everything hurts, something inside you refuses to quit. That something is not just willpower. It is alignment. If you recognize yourself in these signs, do not assume you are lost. You may be in one of the most misunderstood spiritual seasons. The season of alignment through discomfort. Not every painful season is punishment. Some are preparation. And sometimes, the path of God does not feel like peace at first. It feels like pressure. But pressure is what turns raw material into something unbreakable. So if everything feels heavy right now, you may not be off the path. You may be exactly on it. If this message spoke to you, don't ignore it. Reflect on it. Because sometimes, understanding your season is the first step to surviving it.